In the early morning of November 16, 2020, a peaceful suburb in Melbourne was shaken by a terrible act of violence. At exactly 3:38 a.m., a man, consumed by a dangerous obsession, parked his dark Peugeot outside Celeste Mano's home. With a weapon he had been holding onto for months, he had decided that this was the moment to change Celeste's life forever. While the world slept, he quietly approached her window, his mind filled with anger and twisted thoughts. Celeste Mano was born on November 22, 1996 in Melbourne, Australia. She was the second of three children born to Aggie DeMauro and Tony Mano. Her older brother Jaden was 10 years her senior, while her younger brother Alessandro was born a year after Celeste. Growing up in a close-knit family, Celeste enjoyed playing with her younger brother. Despite the age difference, her older brother Jaden admired her greatly, seeing her as the light of the household. Celeste excelled during her high school years. She was an active member of the cheerleading team, had many friends, and consistently performed well academically. Her peers described her as a positive person who always found the silver lining in every situation. However, life took a turn when her parents separated. Celeste stayed with her mother and younger brother, while her older brother Jaden eventually married and moved out. Around this time, Celeste landed her first job at a global call center. She quickly excelled in this role, much to the pride of her family, including her father, who remained an important figure in her life despite the separation. What Celeste couldn't foresee was that this job, which brought so much joy and hope to her and her family, would also introduce her to a dangerous situation. In April 2018, a new colleague named Lue Sacco joined the team and soon became obsessed with Celeste. Lue was born in Iraq in 1984, during the height of Saddam Hussein's regime. He was the eldest of 5 children in a Christian family. In 1992, his family was granted a humanitarian visa and relocated to Australia through a Turkish refugee camp. They settled north of Melbourne, where Lue grew up. Despite the challenges of being a non-English-speaking immigrant in a new and strange land, Lue was considered a loving son and a caring, understanding brother by his family. He excelled academically, particularly in mathematics. However, in 2010, the family was shaken when Lue's younger brother was sentenced to prison for killing a man at a Melbourne nightclub. According to their mother, this event severed any ties between Lue and his convicted brother. Unlike his sibling, Lue had never been in trouble with the law. After high school, Lue pursued tertiary education, and it was during this time that his behavior began to change. He became increasingly reclusive, often displaying signs of anger. Interacting with others became a challenge, and he frequently felt rejected or persecuted by his peers. This led him to withdraw further, spending most of his time isolated in his room at home. Transitioning into the workforce proved just as difficult as his time at university. Although Lue could find temporary retail jobs, he struggled to keep them. On a personal level, Lue had never been in a stable romantic relationship, nor had he experienced any intimate connections with women. So, when he landed the job at the call center, his family felt a sense of relief, hoping this would be the beginning of the stability he so desperately needed. However, by early 2019, Loué's performance at work deteriorated and he was eventually let go. On the day he was dismissed, his obsession with Celeste began. Though they weren't close, Celeste, noticing his distress, kindly offered him support and walked him to the door. She was taken aback when Loué kissed her on the cheek, feeling uncomfortable as she didn't believe they were on such familiar terms. When she mentioned it to her mother, Celeste dismissed her feelings of discomfort, suggesting that Loué might have been harboring feelings for her all along without her noticing. A few days later, Loué reached out to her on a popular photo-sharing social media platform, making Celeste feel even more uneasy. Celeste confided in her mother about the incident, and from that moment on, things spiraled out of control. Celeste, with great tact and courtesy, made it clear to Loué that she had no interest in pursuing any kind of relationship with him. To her, he was merely a co-worker, nothing more. However, Loué became obsessed and began bombarding her with messages. Despite her repeated pleas for him to stop, he continued his unwanted attention. Even though Loué attempted to find a job, whether in computing, surveillance, security, or installation, he never managed to secure stable employment again. He continued living with his parents, spending most of his time isolated in his room. By March 2020, when the Australian government imposed strict lockdowns due to the global health crisis, Loué intensified his harassment of Celeste. Every time she blocked him, he would create a new account and send her a direct message. Celeste did everything she could to stop him, but as time passed, she became increasingly miserable. During the brief periods when the government eased restrictions, Celeste's family noticed her growing stress, anxiety, and preoccupation. The man who was tormenting her was slowly stripping away the peace that had always characterized her. Despite this, Celeste tried her best to avoid alarming her family, assuring them that she would always be vigilant, whether while driving, at work, or with friends. As life gradually returned to normal and restrictions were lifted, Celeste was able to return to work. In the first few days back, her colleagues noticed her usual positive energy. True to her nature, she made sure everyone in the office felt comfortable. However, behind this facade, Celeste was living with constant anxiety, unsure how to keep Loué at bay. The only person who was aware of the situation was her mother, with whom Celeste had a close relationship and confided in about everything. After enduring 6 months of Loué's harassment, Celeste went to the police station with her mother. However, they were met with indifference from the officers. Since Loué hadn't committed a crime, the police dismissed the case, stating there was nothing they could do. They simply advised Celeste to ignore him or shut down all her social media profiles. At Loué's home, his family was unaware of his obsessive infatuation with his former co-worker. By this time, his harassment had taken on more vulgar and degrading forms, expressed in deeply disrespectful and disturbing messages. When Celeste's mother discovered that Loué had continued to torment her daughter, they returned to the police station to report the latest developments. Eventually, Loué was notified that he had to keep his distance due to a personal safety intervention order. However, Celeste's mother was not convinced, voicing her concerns to Celeste by saying that it was just a piece of paper. Unfortunately, she was right. The order only fueled Loué's actions. He began following Celeste and even managed to find out where she lived. As the days passed without any positive change in Loué's behavior, on August 15, 2020, he sent Celeste a 3.5-page document urging her to withdraw her police complaints against him, claiming she was ruining his life. Celeste was so terrified by this letter that she couldn't bring herself to read it fully. Instead, she handed it directly to the police officer she had been dealing with. rather than achieving the effect Louis hoped for. Sending the letter allowed the police to act, leading to his arrest for violating the restraining order. He was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice, a crime that carries a 10-year sentence in Australia. Although Louis was released on bail, the police advised Celeste's family to keep the intervention order in place. But this only enraged Louis further. Within 24 hours, he purchased a knife and began devising a plan. For the next 3 months, Louis disappeared, neither contacting Celeste nor writing to her. Peace gradually returned to her life. During this time, Celeste was fortunate enough to meet Chris Ridsdale, a young man she quickly fell in love with. The feeling was mutual, and Celeste regained her joyful demeanor. Her thoughts and heart were now filled with dreams and aspirations. Though their relationship wasn't official yet, both had already met each other's families and were even planning to take the next step. However, they chose to keep their relationship low-key, refraining from flaunting their romance on social media. The birth of her niece added to Celeste's happiness, making her life feel complete. Then, on Sunday, November 15th, 2020, after a perfect date with her boyfriend, Celeste felt comfortable enough to make their relationship public. She posted a photo of them, smiling and in love. According to prosecutors and investigators, it was this very photo that ignited Louis's fury. Convinced that the post was a deliberate attempt to taunt him, showing that she was unavailable to him and had chosen someone else, Louis decided it was time to put his plan into action and prove that he had control over her life. In the early hours of Monday, November 16, 2020, at precisely 3:38 a.m., Louis drove his dark Peugeot to Celeste's home, armed with the weapon he had purchased months earlier. After some time lurking outside, he identified Celeste's room and broke the window. Without hesitation, and giving her no time to react, he ended her life. The attack lasted just 2.5 minutes, but in that brief time, he inflicted more than 20 wounds. Afterward, he dropped the weapon on the bedroom floor and fled the scene the same way he had entered. Awakened by the noise, Celeste's mother rushed to her daughter's room, only to be met with the worst possible sight. In a panic, she immediately called emergency services. When the paramedics arrived and the crime scene was secured, the officers informed the devastated mother that the weapon lay on the floor. It was only then that Celeste's mother realized who was responsible for this unimaginable tragedy. Not long after, Louis crashed his car into the police station and surrendered to the authorities. Despite admitting to knowing what had happened to Celeste, he refused to accept responsibility, claiming his memory of the event was blurry. Since he had sustained some injuries that night, Louis was admitted to a local hospital where he remained under police guard. Devastated by the loss of his girlfriend, Chris couldn't stop trembling. His sister stayed by his side, trying to comfort him, though unsure how to help. He kept questioning why such a terrible fate had befallen Celeste, and through tears he would remember that they had planned to celebrate her birthday together at the end of that very week. A few days later, on Friday, November 20th, 2020, during a search for evidence in the area between Celeste's house and the police station, officers confiscated a mobile phone. Meanwhile, an improvised shrine outside Celeste's home continued to grow, with dozens of people leaving floral tributes in her memory. Friends and family also brought cards, vases, photo frames, and even a teddy bear. 2 days later, on Sunday, November 22nd, the day that would have been Celeste's 24th birthday, her brother Jaden finally found the strength to publicly express his grief on social media, sharing the immense love he had always felt for her. That evening, relatives and friends gathered for a vigil, during which various family members spoke to the media, sharing how much they would miss Celeste and recalling what a wonderful person she was. At this time, Louis, still free from charges, was recovering in the hospital after surgery for deep cuts on one hand. His parents hadn't seen him since the incident. When he was finally discharged in a bid to be declared mentally incompetent, Louis feigned psychosis symptoms, telling psychiatrists that he had a hallucination where a man had instructed him to act like a criminal. Louis's mother, unable to comprehend how her son could have committed such a heinous act, confessed to the press that she was tormented by thoughts of Celeste's final moments. In a gesture of honesty that revealed the depth of her anguish, she added that she wished her son had turned his rage on her instead of Celeste. On Monday, November 30th, 2020, in a private ceremony, Celeste's remains were laid to rest. The family requested that mourners not bring large bouquets of flowers, but instead honor her with a single flower or a candle. Celeste's mother walked through the service to say a final goodbye to her daughter. Alongside her indescribable grief, there was also the weight of guilt for not having reached Celeste's room sooner and perhaps preventing the tragedy. The following week, a member of the Justice Party presented a petition in Parliament to strengthen laws on harassment. The initiative, sparked by the outrage over the case, had gathered over 8,000 signatures at that time. Meanwhile, Celeste's mother wasn't idle either. She launched her own battle, seeking justice not only for her daughter but also for other potential victims of similar crimes. On the evening of Wednesday, December 16, 2020, around 100 people gathered in the suburb where Celeste's family lived for another commemoration of her life. Originally, family and friends planned to float soy candles, adorned with small lotus flowers, down a local river. However, a total fire ban in the area forced them to use glowing paper flowers instead. From that point on, Celeste's loved ones dedicated all their efforts to ensuring justice was served. They were relieved when several psychiatric experts discovered that Louis had faked symptoms of mental disturbance and hallucinations. Based on this, he was declared mentally fit to stand trial. A forensic psychiatrist evaluated Louis 3 times and produced a 125-page report, the longest of his career. The expert diagnosed Louis with severe personality disorder, depressive disorder, and body dysmorphia, stating that he had never encountered someone with such a diagnosis who wasn't also a psychopath. Despite all the evidence, including Louis's initial confession, the legal proceedings dragged on, forcing Celeste's family to endure numerous court appearances. Each time, they had to sit in silence as Louis tried to evade responsibility, insisting on a supposed temporary loss of reason, claims that had already been debunked by experts. Finally, during the last week of January 2024, Louis pleaded guilty to murder, a plea that typically comes with certain legal benefits. This was seen as yet another twisted turn by Celeste's family, who felt the justice system had failed them. A month later, during the sentencing hearing, dozens of Celeste's family and friends filled the court. The family carried a bright blue urn out of the courtroom, placing it in front of Celeste's closest relatives. Louis, now 39 years old, wore a prison uniform and black-framed corrective glasses, showing no emotion as he sat in the dock. The judge emphasized Louis's ability to distinguish between right and wrong, even if his judgment had been clouded at the time of Celeste's murder. Louis was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with a minimum of 30 years before he could be eligible for parole. Before concluding the hearing, the judge mentioned that while the prospects for Louis's rehabilitation were limited, there was a possibility that his mental illness could be treated during the decades he would need to serve before his release. The parole eligibility date was set for 2050. However, The judge clarified that when the time came, the state parole board could determine that the risks were too high and deny him parole. Many of Celeste's relatives wept upon hearing that Louis would not receive a life sentence, the harshest penalty under Victorian law. As they left the courtroom, Celeste's mother couldn't contain her anger, expressing disbelief that the court had chosen to show mercy to the man who had shown none to her daughter. She was further outraged to learn that prosecutors would not appeal the sentence, declaring that they had done a poor job. Legal experts pointed out that despite the immense and justified pain of the family, in Victoria, the standard sentence for a crime of this nature was 25 years, so a 36-year sentence could not be considered a failure. For Chris, the fact that his girlfriend had to endure such relentless harassment for so long was a crime in itself. Feeling betrayed by the justice system at various levels, Celeste's family and friends spent that night at her grave, a place they visited regularly and intended to continue visiting. Celeste's mother advocated for life sentences for those who take the lives of others. She aimed to gather 75,000 signatures. Celeste's case highlights a problem that hundreds of people are currently facing, being pursued by someone obsessed with them. In the age of social media, this type of behavior has become easier to detect and report, but it has also given stalkers more tools to monitor their victims. Authorities worldwide must create new mechanisms to address these situations and provide the protection that victims desperately need. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.